The year was 1540. Behind the grand halls and jewelled chandeliers of Hampton Court Palace, a silent tragedy was taking shape, one that would soon eclipse any grim tale of betrayal or bloodshed. While the court waltzed through endless feasts and laughter echoed in gilded corridors, one woman's life was quietly being torn apart. Her downfall didn't come from treason, lust, or rebellion. It began with something far more dangerous in the eyes of a tyrant king: his disappointment. Anne of Cleves had crossed the sea not as a lover, but as a political offering, a pawn in a game meant to bind England to the Protestant cause and shield Henry VIII from his Catholic foes. Yet instead of a queen cherished and admired, she became a target of mockery, a breathing reminder of a union the king could not bear to touch. Her only sin was existing in a form that failed to please him. In the glittering theatre of Tudor power, that was enough to destroy a woman. This is not the fairy tale of the wife who escaped execution. This is the unvarnished story of humiliation dressed as diplomacy, of cruelty masked as politics, and of a king whose own decaying body and tormented pride sought vengeance on the innocent. Today, we uncover the real story behind one of the most misunderstood marriages in royal history, where beauty, power, and disgust collided beneath the crown of Henry VIII. This is the story of how Henry VIII turned a noble and well-bred German princess into a national joke, and how that same woman endured humiliation so profound it would have crushed almost anyone else. By the end of this tale, Anne of Cleves will stand not just as a victim of one man's cruelty, but as a reflection of the rotting heart of Tudor England itself. But before we confront the destruction of her dignity, we must first face the creature responsible for it. By 1539, Henry VIII was no longer the radiant prince who once charmed Europe with his golden curls and athletic grace. The years of excess, indulgence, and paranoia had transformed him into something half human, half corpse. His enormous body required mechanical supports just to move. His legs, once strong enough to joust before cheering crowds, now oozed pus and blood beneath perfumed silk. Courtiers, trained in the art of survival, learned to smile while breathing through their mouths to avoid the stench that followed their king. Modern medical historians who have studied contemporary accounts describe a nightmare of suffering. Henry likely suffered from chronic osteomyelitis, a festering bone infection that brought unrelenting pain and produced a nauseating discharge. His physicians, bound by ignorance of infection and cleanliness, could only swaddle the wounds in cloth and feed him opium to dull the agony. But the medicine that numbed his body also clouded his mind, turning a once brilliant ruler into a volatile tyrant driven by suspicion, rage, and self-loathing. The disease ravaged not only his body, but his pride. His circulation weakened, his hormones thrown into chaos, his ability to perform as a husband fading away. Yet Henry could never admit the truth. The very idea that the mighty King of England, the man who had broken with Rome to chase passion, could be impotent was unthinkable. And so, in the shadow of his rotting flesh, the seeds of Anne of Cleves' humiliation began to grow. Unable or unwilling to confront his own decay, Henry VIII built a fantasy to protect himself. He convinced his fevered mind that his failures were never physical, but moral. Never his weakness, but his wife's faults. Each failed marriage became another judgment upon womanhood itself, as if their inability to stir his fading desire proved their unworthiness. It was a cruel defense mechanism, one that turned pain into punishment and guilt into tyranny. And soon, that diseased reasoning would fall upon Anne of Cleves. She would become the canvas upon which Henry projected every ounce of shame, disgust, and rage he felt toward his own failing body. Across the cold waters of the Channel, in the quiet, disciplined court of Cleves, a young woman prepared for the greatest and most dangerous performance of her life. Anne was 24, raised under the strict yet cultured rule of her brother, Duke Wilhelm. She had been schooled in languages, etiquette, and music, groomed to serve her family's ambitions with poise and obedience. She understood duty more than passion, a trait that would soon save her life, even as it condemned her happiness. For England, this marriage was not a love story, it was a lifeline. The realm stood dangerously alone. France and the Holy Roman Empire, both loyal to the Pope, had drawn closer, their alliance threatening Henry's Protestant-leaning kingdom. After his break with Rome, England's diplomatic bridges had burned to ash. A Protestant alliance with the German states was the only shield left. And Anne of Cleves, modest, loyal, and politically invaluable, was the key to that salvation. Her brother, respected among the Lutheran princes, made her hand a matter of survival for Henry, not sentiment. But even as envoys negotiated dowries and treaties, the king's own insecurities corroded the foundation of this fragile union. The man who once believed himself God's chosen ruler now lived in constant terror of rejection. His body was failing him, his virility fading, and yet his ego demanded constant reassurance of his desirability. He needed a wife who could restore his pride through adoration. The tragedy began long before Anne's ship ever touched English soil. It began with a painting. Hans Holbein the Younger, Henry's most trusted court painter, was sent to capture the likeness of the future queen. His brush recorded Anne's calm dignity, her eyes gentle, her features serene beneath the ornate headdress of her homeland. In the portrait, she appeared poised and pleasant, her beauty quiet rather than bold. But the king saw something else. Inflamed by courtly flattery and his own desperate imagination, Henry turned the portrait into a fantasy. Courtiers, eager to please, described Anne as radiant, graceful, and spirited. Her skin soft as milk, her voice musical, her manners divine. They told him what he longed to hear, building an image of a perfect bride who would awaken his faded passion and flatter his dying pride. By the time Anne's entourage reached England in December 1539, she carried not only the hopes of her nation, but the burden of the king's impossible dream. She had spent months studying English customs, learning new dances, even practicing the language to please her husband. Her dowry overflowed with treasures, embroidered silks, jewels, and fine German craftsmanship, tokens of alliance and goodwill. But everything unraveled the moment she met her king. At Rochester, Henry decided to surprise her in disguise, a romantic gesture borrowed from medieval courtly tales. Dressed as a humble messenger, he burst into Anne's chambers, expecting the thrill of instant recognition, the kind of swooning delight he believed his presence should inspire. What he found instead was polite confusion. Anne, raised in the formality of the German court, did not recognize him. She responded as etiquette demanded, graciously but without emotion. Henry, humiliated and enraged, mistook her composure for coldness. What had been intended as a moment of romance turned into an unforgivable insult. In that instant, the king's pride cracked, and the woman who had crossed seas to save England's future became the target of his deepest insecurities. In the year 1540, behind the glittering halls of Hampton Court Palace, a dark story began to unfold. A story of pride, humiliation, and silent survival. Anne of Cleves, a young German princess, was chosen to marry the most powerful man in England, King Henry VIII. Her marriage was meant to unite nations and protect England from its enemies. But instead of love, she found cruelty. Henry VIII was no longer the handsome prince he once was. His body was decaying, his legs covered in open sores, and his pride wounded beyond repair. When he saw Anne for the first time, he felt no desire, and instead of blaming himself, he blamed her. He called her ugly, dull, and unworthy. The court followed his lead, mocking her behind closed doors. Anne's wedding night became a nightmare. The king avoided her, spreading lies to justify his rejection. Yet, while others would have begged or broken, Anne stayed calm. She accepted the humiliation with quiet strength. She played the game wisely and lived. Henry annulled their marriage, but rewarded her with lands, wealth, and the title King's Sister. While his next wife, Catherine Howard, went to the executioner's block, Anne enjoyed peace, freedom, and respect. When Henry finally died, broken and diseased, Anne lived on, admired for her grace and intelligence. She had survived the most dangerous man in England not through rebellion, but through patience. In the cruel world of Tudor politics, Anne of Cleves did the impossible. She turned disgrace into victory.